audio check shortly after turning on our cameras. Great. Okay, can we start by confirming if the panel is complete?
Sorry, my camera's being not very cooperative right now, but I'm here. Hello.
All right. Okay. So thank you. So we have Albert, who is here. Carlo, is Carlo here yet from the panel? Denise. Okay, Carlo is here. Denise Rondina. Okay. Deva, I can see Deva, and Haid. I can see Haid. Great, thank you so much. Hi, my name is Thea. I'll be your chair. Please refer to the panel as just the panel. I have no preferred gender pronouns. Could I ask the panel to quickly introduce themselves, please?
Hello. Hi, I'm Albert. Sorry. Pronouns are he, him.
Hello, I'm Tony. Pronouns are he, him.
Hi, I'm Carlo. Pronouns here today.
Deva here, prefer pronouns are he and they.
Hi, I'm Haid. Pronouns he or they.
All right, great. Let me just confirm if Denise is here already. If not, we can wait for Denise and start with the introductions for government team, please.
That's me, right? Yeah, great. Hi, I'm David, speaking first from the metaverse. No pronoun preferences.
Hello, I'm Miko. I'll be speaking second and reply. I have no preference. POIs in the chat. Also, my computer crashes from time to time. If ever I have a second device, I'll switch to. But Tech, is it okay if you make the other Miko video?
Hello, my name is Luigi. Frigid pronouncing day. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Gov. Could we have Opp now, please?
Hi, I'm Irene. I'll be speaking first for opposition. I have no preferred pronouns. We will be deciding who replies maybe in a bit.
Hello, I'm Quinten. I'll be speaking second. I have no preferred gender pronouns. POIs in the chat as well.
Hello, I'm Micah. I'll be Opp Whip. No preferred gender pronouns. POIs in the chat.
All right, great. Thank you so much, debaters. I will be turning off my camera to conserve my internet and my bandwidth issues. So feel free to do so as well. Can I just confirm if the panel is complete? Is Denise here yet? All right. Denise seems to not be here yet. Let me just shoot a chat to Orcom.
Which motion are we debating on?
Metaverse.
All right.
Great. All right. Denise seems to be here. Can you just confirm if Denise is audible?
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. That's great. Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you so much, everyone. We can start this round. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this year's semifinals of the PIDC 2021. My name is Thea. I'm your chair. Just a few reminders for the teams within the round. Please do not forget to state your POI preference as well as your pronouns before the start of your speech. Also, make sure to note any trigger warnings should there be any trigger warnings in your speech. Great, thank you so much. Debating on the motion, this House supports the creation of the Facebook metaverse. To start off this debate, may we now have the Prime Minister. Here.
Hi. So to start off, trigger warning in this speech for potentially triggering mentions of harassment and assault. Okay. PY is in the chat. And starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In Government Bench, we believe that the metaverse represents two things. The first is access, for whom physical space is restrictive and often oppressive. And secondly, productivity, for an economy that has for far too long relied on a limited, scarce resources to provide services for people whom need it the most. Question: what does the metaverse look like? First of all, we do not want to consider non-Facebook metaverses. We also don't think it's a nice stance for Opp to take. But briefly, we think the reason why the Facebook metaverse is good is because it entails cooperation between lots of different companies whom are likely to compete and use their technological capacity to ensure this is done as immersively and as safely as possible. And we also don't think Facebook always has total control, as they will, one, need the cooperation of other countries, particularly their technological expertise. And we also suspect this to look like some form of leasing contract with Facebook and the other companies, perhaps some consortium of technological organizations. What do we expect this to tangibly look like? First, this will not launch tomorrow. This will require significant amounts of research and development on the effects that this has on mental health to ensure convenience and ease of access. There's a maximal incentive to do this because otherwise companies would not use it if it was bad, if it had terrible side effects, and so on. Secondly, an augmented reality is in the fullest of senses in this metaverse. They can see other people, explore entirely visual environments, and receive tactile and visual feedback from the comfort of their own home. If Facebook truly wants this to replace the establishments as it wants to, as it says in the info slide, it has to make it accessible, otherwise it will not succeed. We see Facebook doing this in status quo, where in order to get people just to use Facebook, they set up cell towers and internet access in rural areas to expand coverage and usership. This is good for these people, it is good for particularly vulnerable sectors of the population, and it is good for small businesses. Two arguments thus. First, accessibility. First of all, proving that this will get substantially more cheap and accessible over time. Even if this can be potentially initially expensive, over time, the cost of putting up services and distributing hardware becomes cheaper and cheaper. Note that this also preempts any argument from Opp saying it's inaccessible, because for them to claim this at all, they have to respond to these three claims. The first is that this benefits from economies of scale, which is that the more a large corporation like Facebook produces, the cheaper the fixed cost of each good becomes, which means that they can continue to produce things at lower and lower costs. Secondly, they benefit from specialization in research, where Facebook can research to make things more efficiently and thus decrease the cost of production, which is good because they want more people to access these things in order for them to get a more stable market share. The third is they also have market segmentation, which is that in order to truly reach everyone, they will not just cater to the richest people who can afford it, but they will make cheaper versions so that people of different economic classes can participate in the metaverse because they have an incentive to, but also because the companies they cooperate with also have an incentive to. What is the comparative of status quo and why is it so much worse? It is worse in three distinct ways. First, geographic discrimination of physical space. Areas that are not economically productive receive little investment. They face the difficulty and the costs of physically traveling to a workplace or to go to school. It might just not be safe to commute, and often this is a result of government failure, particularly because many of them are politically and marginalized and do not receive a major say in the national, political scene. What happens on Opp is that many people either, one, never receive access to many of the benefits of work or education because it is simply not set up in your physical location, or two, they take on exorbitant costs in order to access these things that can put them and their family into debt for the rest of their lives. Transportation, renting an apartment, the increased cost of living in economically productive areas, and so on. These things are often hell for the average person. Our comparative is better since we do not rely on geographical boundaries. If you are from an underprivileged community or a far-flung area, you can work in a virtual workspace. You now have mobility and opportunity, and a degree of private intervention is necessary when states have failed. We allow access to these things. Secondly, identity. People in the real world discriminate for physical reasons, and many are locked out of identity. Women who cannot go out due to high rates of harassment, ethnic minorities who are afraid to go out due to police brutality, trans individuals who are attacked disproportionately on the street. We will not say that these virtual places are perfect and are free from discrimination, but the worst forms of discrimination are always physical: assault, harassment, police brutality. And what happens on Opp is that one, people never go out and are denied the ability to work and enjoy a night out with their friends and to just be who they are, or two, they do go out and constantly fear these experiences, or in the worst case, actually experience these things. The comparative is far better. We have open spaces without fear, dating without fear, the ability to go out and be yourself and be in a virtual space without the fears and dangers of a physical space. The third reason for why we are better and different and more accessible is due to physical discrimination. This should be quite trivial. We're talking about people with disability or people who simply find it hard to go to areas where they need to work. This is far more accessible for them. At the end of this first argument, we make physical space a version of that that physical space substantially more accessible, which means that the most vulnerable individuals get access to things that they would have never had access to otherwise. I'll take the POI now.
If you're operating in failed states, why should we give unprecedented power to unaccountable social media companies to get all the benefits you say?
You know, that actually is a good thing because it means that in failed states where the corrupt state it has less comparative power, we think that on comparative, these corporations are accountable to the people and their dollar, which means that due to incentives that we provide earlier, there's an incentive for them to be good or at the very least provide services. Like, I don't know why your comparative is failed states anyway. Secondly, we also say that people are substantially more productive on our side. Why? We will not eliminate the need for physical space totally, but by drastically reducing the need for it, we have substantial economic benefits. There are 5 reasons why we are more economically powerful. First, traffic and congestion. It is during the morning rush to Manila where millions of dollars are wasted since people are in their cars instead of working. 2, it is draining. Your body has limited physical energy. You have to move the location, go out to eat, transport. The physical maintenance of having to wake up in the morning and put on makeup is exhausting for most people. Thirdly, physical space is incredibly limited. Land is expensive and makes it impossible for businesses to set up, and so much of it is used for commercial purposes instead of potential housing, which is why rent is so high. And this land can now go to cheaper homes since businesses don't need it as much. 4, small businesses can now set up more because there is far less risk since they don't have to overcome a gigantic initial capital barrier of land to provide services, and now they can charge less because costs are less. And fifthly, not to mention the environmental costs of traffic and physical congestion. Why is this important? 4 reasons. The first is that 1, the most limited resources of companies are wasted on unproductive things that now reduce employment on Opp and drive up the cost of goods and services. We have the opposite effect by stimulating the economy and allow more people to be employed by reducing the costs of services and operation. 2 is that we are better able to move this downward pressure on commercial land to provide substantial benefits to people in the eviction crisis, the people who can now buy homes in urban congested areas where things are most economically productive. The third is that so much money is wasted on physical resources like buildings and roads that could have gone to other more socially utile things like research and development, cutting the costs of goods or expanding the coverage of services from corporations. And the fourth is that consumers now reallocate their money from rent, can use it to patronize businesses and generally expand hiring. Why are these all good? We protect the most vulnerable actor, namely those left out of the economic project of upliftment through physical spaces, namely through the metaverse by replacing these physical spaces and reducing their demand. But secondly is that we create a substantially more accessible, more productive world for all people on affirmative bench. Affirm.
All right. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Before we proceed to the Leader of Opposition, the tech team is asking Biko's other account to return to the main room so that we can assign co-host function. And then afterwards, we can continue with the round.
I'm so sorry and thank you.
No worries, no worries. All right. So I think the backup Zoom is in the main room now. We can proceed perhaps with the Leader of Opposition. You're here.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hold on, I'm just my notes. Great. POIs in the chat, please. Thank you. Right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We don't want to give social media companies control over our entire lives, our social interactions, our workplace relationships, and our entertainment. For the fact that on their side of the house, where they are able to dictate what we see and what we hear, and they are likely to create a cycle of addiction such that Mark Zuckerberg and all of the higher ups of your social media company can gain more profit. What is the stance coming from opposition? We don't want the Facebook metaverse to exist. We are principally against the concept of a metaverse to begin with in the way that it is described in the info slide. But additionally, we think Facebook as a company who is likely, for example, to spearhead a lot of these efforts has also been accused of subverting democracy and manipulating its users' data, which we also would suggest is regrettable. Before I move on to my responses and argumentation, I want to make something very clear. Government bench cannot prop how the metaverse are likely to look like. They need to understand that this is a brainchild, if you will, of the profit-oriented company model of Facebook that has historically used things like take the data of their users in order to manipulate them and gain their own profit. This is the model that we are talking about. They cannot just make some magical world that is somehow better than all of reality. 2 things in my speech. First, why the metaverse is likely to be bad for people. And secondly, why principally social media companies are not accountable and therefore should not give them this level of power over people. people. Before I move on to that, a few responses. I want to point out that David uses the justification that the real world is bad in order to justify the existence of the metaverse. It's inherently better. Two things to this. First, I would suggest this is not the only mechanism by which we can make reality much better. We would contend things like governance, etc., also fix a lot of the problems that they say. But the next thing I want to talk about is he himself says that this is not going to be implemented tomorrow. And given that we have seen general trends of inclusion and progressivism in real life with generally better economic growth throughout the entire globe, already points the point at which that they can get a metaverse on their side of the house is also when a lot of, or like a good amount of the real world problems have already been gaining a lot of traction and solutions, which I would contend is already better on our side of the house. But the second thing I want to talk about is that it's inherently more accessible because there are things like you can go out and be yourself, for the fact that many individuals, for example, are like strained by the fact that they look a certain way or they are a certain person. I want to point out that this is completely based on anonymity. But in a world when you are attempting to emulate the real world through emulations and augmented reality, anonymity becomes less and less accessible. For the fact that you wanted to replace a lot of these interactions, then I would contend a lot of these things also need to point out to your actual existence, your face, your race, your gender. First argument, why the metaverse is likely to be bad for people. I think it's worse for three reasons. First, it's likely to be made addictive. Second, it makes people make bad choices. And lastly, it creates a lesser quality social interactions. Why is it likely to be made addictive? First, that there are perverse incentives from the companies themselves to do so. First, they want money, they want control over politics, and this is an extension of the pre-existing business model, for example, that exists with Facebook and a lot of these social media companies. Other than the fact that they have the incentive, they also have the capacity. Notice how algorithms discovering your weaknesses and exploiting them can make you addicted. If they know that you're addicted to gambling, for example, they can show a lot of ads on gambling and all of these things. If, for example, they understand that there are certain political things that make you angry or more engaged, that is what they will show you in the algorithm. So what this means is that they're not showing you the time of day. You're not surrounding you, for example, with the stimuli. They are surrounding you, for example, with the stimuli that makes you not sleep until 3 in the morning in order for you to keep using their platform. This is bad because addiction inherently makes you irrational in making choices and affects your psychological capacity to feel happiness from anything. For the fact, it becomes less and less satisfying at smaller doses as time passes. That's the first reason. The second reason is that it makes you make bad choices. The frame here is that social media companies do not have their users' interest at mind because they want to profit, they want to assure the sustainability of their company, and they want to appease their shareholders. So I think at that point, advertising becomes more pernicious. They get more money in getting advertising fees from other large corporations that seek to limit their users' agency versus individuals themselves. I think also in a matter of time, because you rely on the metaverse for the perceived benefits, it is unlikely that you're going to do productive things in your life like studying, working, etc., etc. Not that because the metaverse was created to replace workplaces, but it doesn't mean users, for example, will use it like this, especially because it was built on Facebook, which is not inherently a productivity app and all these things. But lastly, I think your perceptions about the world are far worse. How will these algorithms work? It will show you what you have historically wanted, political views that are closest to you. It creates even more harmful echo chambers because of the influx of information from all of the cooperating companies that are likely to be part of the metaverse to begin with. So on Opp, we agree that bad political views of the world will still exist, but real life doesn't have the pernicious algorithms that profit off of echo chambers you create. It is about the scale and extent of these particular echo chambers. All your interactions on government will be influenced by the echo chambers you have versus on opposition, where some interactions can still be permeated by other views because there's no overarching algorithm controlling real life. The last reason as to why it's bad is because you will get less quality social interaction. I want to point out that on government bench, there is no commitment to people. You can block them. You don't really have any true friends at that point in time. You can choose not to engage with them. I think the second thing I want to talk about is that human connection is just different. Even in quarantine, when we have online connectivity, we still crave for physical connections. So even if you want to be able to make meaningful relationships, biologically, this won't be enough, and therefore you are less satisfied on their side of the house. POI.
While I don't believe you've proved it, if the real world is consistently getting better, why can't this getting better be applied to the metaverse? But also, if the metaverse is so bad and the real world is so good, then the metaverse has an incentive to get better. Otherwise, no one would use the metaverse.
All right, so this is why you don't have the same incentives. And this is the second argument, right? It's for the fact that it doesn't go at the same rate. For the fact that people in real life control real life and people in real life have interests over their own lives, as opposed, for example, to social media corporations and the metaverse, which is inherently controlled by someone up there. This is the second argument, right? How social media companies are not accountable and we should not give them this level of power over the lives of people. First, people on the ground are unlikely to be able to opt out of these things. And this is how it's different from any other medium of information, right? For the fact that it's pervasive and self-perpetuating, it becomes widespread. It becomes a requirement for your employers or for your schools to use these things to engage in the metaverse. And we agree that this is very accessible, and I think a previous speaker does this very well, such that it becomes very pervasive. Second, the way that it is sold is to be perceived as a requirement. The same way that in theory you don't need a phone to survive because of the pervasive marketing around it. At this point in time, we do need these things. Second, I think the barriers of entry for competition are incredibly high. Facebook has an incredible amount of control. So even if another corporation wanted to be able to compete, you still can't opt into these things for the fact that the barrier of entry is high. What does this mean? Slowly, the metaverse becomes the main source of all information, possibly the only source of information at times. Why is this bad? It's augmented, meaning that it's controlled by another individual as opposed to real life, wherein people cannot control what you see. So the individuals are social media corporations in this instance, and they are inherently cannot be held accountable for a few reasons. They are not democratically elected. Even if private individuals on the ground want to be able to challenge them, they can't do so for the fact that these people have incredible capital and incredible power. Notice, principally, if there's a mechanism that we cannot opt out of, we must hold them accountable. That is why, because it's hard to opt out of the state, we vote. No such mechanism exists on government bench. No such mechanism exists on government bench. Proud to wins debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. We now invite the Deputy Prime Minister, please. You're here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. First question, can we trust Facebook? This kind of copy-paste argument that comes from Leader of the Opposition. Number one, it is misrepresentative for the Opp POI to be on failed states because the US is not a failed state, but you cannot deny that there are ghettoized communities that are still not the focus of public discourse. The first response to this that they claim is that the world is getting more progressive, which is ridiculous to claim in the age of incredibly large right-wing nationalism and populism, where we have significantly regressed from general socially progressive trends from 2016 onwards. So they cannot create this assertion that these are generally going to be better versus the structural reason that David provides of these are just not communities that are politically influential. These are not communities that are able to lobby and change government significantly, where even in the cases where there are functional democracies, these are not perfect states. Black communities in France, black communities in the US are still going to be geographically discriminated. Note the east side of most cities have been historically more poor than west sides, and therefore this harm still significantly accrues. It is unfair for them to claim that we operate only in failed states when, number one, especially in failed states, I think some degree of private intervention because no accountability from government is likely to be demanded. But two, even without this extreme context, we still operate in it. Number two, in the context of good states, they don't explain why regulation is not likely to work because Facebook, Google have all been regulated quite well by the GERD, that is like indicated in the info side of another motion. And because of the nature of governance that they claim is so good, it is unclear why Facebook has a significant disproportionate power versus governments that likely have a degree of willingness to protect democracy, degree of willingness to regulate against these corporations. What that proves is we significantly mitigate the harm that they claim without them being able to prove the counterfactual of geographic discrimination, of physical discrimination, not likely getting any better significantly. The next thing they claim is this will make you more addicted. The first they want to claim is this is uncomparative. Facebook already exists. What does this mean? The first is that if it is so dangerously addictive, it is incredibly likely that companies that are losing the productivity of their workers, people who are becoming increasingly concerned about its nature, push to either remove leases for workplaces from Facebook because they want their workers to be more productive in a physical space, dopamine rushes, likes, reacts, shares, the attention economy that is not going to disappear on their side of the house. The problem is the limitation of social interaction, which where we claim people are just more likely to organically use these things because they want to be able to see and talk to their friends, because they want to be able to make meaningful social connections, versus on their side of the house where Facebook is unable to do this and therefore is forced and to resort to these other more intrusive mechanisms of having likes, having ways to be able to increase the dopamine in your brain and make you more addicted. In fact, I'd argue the necessity for these things becomes less insofar as you are already happy being surrounded by your coworkers. You already enjoy the ability to join a social institution, etc. Before I move on, I'll take a POI from Opp.
So if you claim regulation, then you also severely undermine your principle of accessibility. In the info slide, it was restrictions on content, etc., etc. Then I would assume accessibility is also less on your side of the house.
I don't know why, because this is far cheaper. Number one, it's easier for a government to regulate a large corporation versus a government looking into areas that would not have been politically influential, significantly investing and funding the educational and work institutions, and trying to uplift and uproot entire communities out of poverty, when we claim in the instances that is not politically favorable, it is far better for people to have an alternative of access. I just don't understand why this dichotomy of governments are good or bad is the case, versus more nuanced claims as to what governments care about, what the likely actions and incentives they take, which is why Opp already loses. Secondly, Irene misrepresents the argument from David. The argument was not because you are anonymous, you are safe. The argument was that the necessity of a physical space is precisely what restricts individuals from opting into these different locations. Because Facebook is unlikely to sell to you a product where you can feel pain, where you can feel harassment, where you can feel brutality, etc. And it is these things that, number one, preemptively take people out of social and political and economic institutions out of fear, which is why many women fear going out at night, which is why many black individuals do not want to go out if they can see the police around them, versus virtual spaces where the necessity of a physical presence is far less likely to take them out of access. But the second thing I want to note is no response to the economic arguments that come from David, that the downward pressure on the push of land is far better, because it's likely that instead of going to commercial institutions, we are far more likely to push them into housing because the demand there increases, because the demand for commercial institutions decreases on our side of the house, or a significantly unproductive cities, because people are caught in traffic, because people are caught in the congestion of physical constraints and logistical failures of poor city and urban planning, that therefore unlock significantly greater opportunities for many individuals. So, on this point alone, you can agree or disagree about the nature of Facebook and governance, but what we have to make clear is therefore that individuals and the likely benefits it is going to prop up uniquely on our side of the house is already a winning case to make. Lastly, they make an argument on social connections, why it is worse. The first thing they claim is that you can block people. The first thing I want to know is just I don't understand why this is mutually exclusive insofar as you can ignore someone in real life where you're unable to commit to many different things and conversations. I just don't know why you can't do that already. But secondly, if this is the hill they're going to die on, we don't understand why it is such a bad thing. If you are restricted from a physical space because you have an individual there that makes you uncomfortable, the capacity to block them and take them out of your sight is probably going to be a useful tool for you, because maybe they have done terrible things to you. Maybe they have caused significant trauma to you. And the only place in which you could do that is online rather than the physical constraints, because maybe they were a relative, maybe they were a close friend, or they just reside in your school, etc. We think this is a uniquely powerful tool, not one that is just non-committal. I don't understand the harm of that. But secondly, I would just make the claim that the political discourse that they claim is so terrible. Number one, the echo chambers problem already exists. What I claim the problem to be is that people are caught up in not being able to see the humanity of another human being, are willing to say words under the guise of a computer screen, and therefore can say incredibly fiery things, incredibly hateful things, whereas the capacity to see another human person makes you far more likely to moderate and tone down potentially dangerous, potentially offensive political discourse that creates better kinds of discussions overall. This debate on opposition is not one about whether Facebook good, Facebook bad. It is a comparison of the likely metaverse that exists. For all these reasons, I am very proud to propose.
We thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for your speech. We now invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Here. invite the government whip, please. Here.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Luigi, Preferred General Pro Team Day. If you have any POIs, you can raise it in the chat. I want to chat for all of your POIs. Yeah. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, and go. So opposition still has no significant comparative in this debate. Facebook still exists in this world and will still play a significant role in people's lives, except, people are already addicted to FB right now. And in many ways, it already plays a significant part in our lives. Can be more immersive, more interactive, more incentives of Facebook, and number 2, on spaces. Number 1, on the incentives of Facebook. The worst case of our side, and remember, best case, worst case comparison. The worst case on our side is that targeted advertising becomes more prominent, and Facebook, as monopolistic as they are, will have significant control over how this platform manifests. And remember, they have to be comparative. Facebook already is monopolistic in many ways. Facebook has already interfered in elections in many ways. So why is this immersion aspect different? This is good for the following reasons. I'm spinning this argument now. 3 things. Number 1, targeted advertising allows companies to connect to consumers in ways that they could have not done so in previous past, right? Allowing to be more immersive, to connect to consumers that would most benefit from their products. So it reduces the friction, it reduces the transportation and selection costs, and people can now converse with these institutions virtually. Before, if you had to converse and you didn't trust individuals on a marketplace, you can now see them virtually and try and talk to other individuals also in a virtual manner because it's more immersive, and you can display that trust on the basis of whether or not their facial expressions are displaying that force of trust, because you are not going to talk to them in a face-to-face setting, and now you're doing it in an augmented reality setting because you're more able to access this. This is inherent, at least in our side, because it is virtual, it is augmented, and it's one in which people can access it through the internet. Number 2, Facebook has significant control is a good thing because it is independent of geographic, physical, and identity barriers. Remember, opposition's response is, no, it's not a debate about real life versus virtual life. Of course it is, because your side is saying most of those individuals, if they really want the real life experience, they have to go to the workplace, they have to go to the mall, they have to go outside and go to another market and then try to interact with these individuals. This is inherent in the most democratized way because the internet is the most democratized platform in the world, and people have this access in in some way through the internet or through the Facebook terms and conditions, which are probably more accessible than many of the selective access of the mall denying poor individuals to enter in. But at least most poor individuals have phones that they can use to access augmented reality, for example, if they're just using this in one platform. I think it's accessible if they also agree technological development also makes it possible. So I think in that manner, technological development doesn't make the world progressive, but technological development does make a lot more people access the internet more. So we still co-opt the benefit on our side. But number 3, Facebook has an incentive to make people addicted. I agree. Facebook likes people making addicted, but being addicted to an AR platform is much better than being addicted to a Facebook phone that doesn't have that AR benefit. That's why it connects you immersively to the service industry, to a social industry, to a productive industry in ways you could have not done so before. I may be addicted to Messenger right now, but me being addicted to dating and then being able to talk with more people in a similar to face-to-face interaction is probably more meaningful for my mental health and talking talking to my friends and conversing with them, and because I want to go out with them in a bar, but now I can't do so, it is more accessible for individuals to be able to do that today. DLO's response to this is to only say that no, Facebook steal your data, and Facebook manipulate you, change your political opinion, and it's hard to regulate this in the future the more and more it develops. But I don't see why this is comparative. Again, remember, comparative. Number two, they already do it, but now it's harder for you to be able to track this data on your side, because now on our side, it's easier for you to tailor fit your own social space on the metaverse, because Facebook does manipulate your data and does use your data for you because they want you to love the user experience. So that's not a bad incentive. That's a good incentive, because I want my social experience to be more immersive, because that's why I opt into the platform in the first place. And I might not be playing Valorant all the time, but I might be dating a lot of people and having a lot of good experiences with people that I may like. That may be a good thing, because you, on your side, you are more you're less control of being able to interact with people, blocking people in real life, or being able to talk to other people. But the last response I have is this: data can make the metaverse cheaper and more accessible, which in the worst case is better than for the thousands of individuals who would have otherwise not had this access in the counterfactual on their side as well. So I think companies do have this incentive to make it better. DLO's response to this is that the world will become better anyways. Technological progress, this word capital labor industry technology, I don't know what that means. I have two things to say to this. Number one, if they like technological development, this is the extension of technological development. That is why we fulfill our benefits. But number two, the physical space is already limited. This is an argument we gave from Prime Minister, but he didn't respond to. You are willing to make technological development be stagnated because they can see that the inequality increase in the future, so people accessing the internet is also less in the future. Therefore, physical space is also limited, and we make it better for those people on our side. Go ahead, by the way.
While there might be many emergent issues with technology, our issue on Opp is that because it's so inclusive, it's hard to opt out because all of the mechanisms within society have circulated and have been encapsulated by it.
I just said the worst case, if it's hard to opt out, it's a good thing, because you still haven't proven why in the future, the worst excesses of racism, the worst excesses of sexism are likely to be gone away. And these individuals, if they're already addicted to a platform like they're addicted today, then that would be a good thing for these individuals to access this type of places. And these spaces are good for them. Dilo's argument is they can co-op Zoom, they can have Discord. All of this is already good. But again, use the responses against them. Number one, Zoom is addictive, Discord is addictive, and that might be a good thing. So we break the additional barrier that makes it currently not as fulfilling to make it even more immersive. Dating face-to-face, Zoom face-to-face, debating as if we are in person is something that could be more fulfilling, because I could feel like I'm speaking to an audience instead of 20 black screens in front of me. Companies want to make it more socially interactive. They want to make it more immersive. It is a profit incentive to do so, and that is why we make it better for a lot of individuals. For these reasons, because we actually dream for a better world that is just beyond black screens, I am very proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip. We now invite the opposition. Here.
Hello, testing if I'm clear and audible.
Yes, you're clear and audible.
All right, thank you. POI preference in the chat. Alternatively, you can turn on your camera and wave, but the Zoom call has many observers, so I don't think I can see you. So just raise the POI, but I won't be calling a POI if I don't see one raised in the chat. Starting.
Oh. Recording in progress.
Hi.
Recording stopped.
I'll let Opp Reply answer that when they give their speech. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are three contradictions in the government case. The first thing is they say you won't feel the fear of harassment or being harassed in the street, but somehow the humanity in the metaverse is so preserved such that you can make meaningful human and political connections across the spectrum. They can't have both. Is the metaverse so distant to reality that when you are assaulted and harassed, it doesn't feel the same? Or is it an augmented reality that mimics real life that you're still able to make meaningful connections? The second contradiction contradiction they make is on access. They concede that social media companies are profit-driven. That is the exact structural reason from David, which is when they defended investments, for example. But they say a lot of these investments will go to slums in areas that are economically unviable, in areas that are not politically accessible. I'm unsure why a social media company that is profit-driven will create all the positive change for the individuals that are oppressed on their side of the house. The third contradiction they make is this concession from Luigi that targeted advertising is good and addiction is good. They say that conversations and trust are made better on their side. Note that targeted advertising is not just what you see online, but how your agency is reduced because it's become so convincing over time because of all the cooperation from the largest social media companies that already exist in status quo and are already cooperating within the metaverse. This is a contradiction because all of their arguments of why real life is bad, like traffic, less productivity, geographic discrimination, physical discrimination, all these things are bad because they reduce your human agency. The fact that the metaverse reduces your agency further because you cannot opt out, all of the other social media companies that regulate Facebook through competition do not exist anymore because they all cooperate through the existence of the metaverse, means that all of the facets of your life are permeated, influenced by the metaverse, and therefore, if the metric of why real life is bad is because it reduces your human agency, that is the exact mechanism of why you cannot give government bench the win in this debate. What are the things they never responded to? The first thing is they try to wash this debate and say that addiction and dependence is symmetric. They cannot claim it is symmetric because if this is so, there's no added value in supporting their claim. But secondly, we say the reason why it's worse on Gov is because it's hard to opt out, which they conceded to in Luigi's speech. We say, principally, if there's an institution that we cannot opt out of, we must hold them accountable. For example, if the state is hard to opt out of, we create the mechanism of democracy and voting to hold the state accountable, but there's no mechanism that exists on Gov except for the concession from Luigi that it is okay that we cannot opt out of these spaces. They say it's good, but they don't explain why Facebook, the one controlling all of the reasons why you cannot opt out, is good, except to say that it wasn't their burden to prove in the debate. It is precisely because of the unprecedented technological development that makes it harmful, and that is why all the arguments from Quintin and Irene still stand in this debate. The only way for you to give the win to government is you believe that all of the problems in status quo can solely or more effectively be solved through the metaverse. 3 reasons why this is not true. First, if the problems they describe are so bad, like no roads, no internet, no opportunities, even economic downfalls and economic productivity, if all these things are so bad, and if we're operating in a reasonable democracy, all these things can be fixed through political will, increased capacity over time, and appeasing the democratic will, etc. Note that these people in power are more accountable to the people that are oppressed compared to social media companies that can manufacture demand, and this is true because you cannot opt out of the Facebook metaverse. So when there's no other alternative for you to go, and therefore all of the companies cooperating within these spaces literally do not have to compete with each other because they gain most profit cooperating with the use of the metaverse. So even if they have proven that you need social media companies to get all these benefits, they don't prove why you need the existence of the metaverse through the social media companies to get all the benefits that they say. The second thing why they don't get this benefit is because they say the metaverse will get better over time because it won't be implemented tomorrow. If it's delayed, then it's unclear whether or not it is accessible as they say, and it is unclear therefore whether or not the added economic value to do this is better than all of the things that Irene already explained. Thirdly, they try to cheese this debate and confuse you into thinking that all the harms are symmetric, because if you talk about bullying and assault, etc., it is far worse on Gov because your abuser literally has access to all of your information because of the cooperation inside the metaverse. You can't even say that you can be anonymous because they have to mimic real life as well. So I'm unsure what the added benefit on their side of the house. But secondly, in terms of the eco chambers they create, the only response from Miko was to say that this already exists in real life. But if you read the info slide and the way David proves it, it has to be pervasive, it has to be overwhelming, and it has to control all your life for you to continuously subscribe to it. The only way we are able to break echo chambers in status quo is when we have alternative social media companies. But you don't get this mechanism on Gov because all of the big and viable social media companies and alternatives will be bought off by Facebook, will cooperate in the metaverse because, as they say, it is the most profitable option for all of the social media companies that exist. POI.
If regulation is hard due to capital barriers, this also explains why regulation is nearly impossible on your side. What you don't recognize is that we are already addicted to physical spaces, and the only world where people get addicted to the metaverse is if the real world is already terrible.
No, so this doesn't respond to Quintin's argument that it isn't just hard to regulate now. It becomes harder to regulate over time. So we agree that regulation in status quo isn't perfect, but the burden of GovBench was to prove that the regulation on their side gets better. If you say it's pervasive, if you want to create people that are dependent on the metaverse for existence, for productivity, for meaningful connections, I'm unsure whether or not people will want to regulate it, even if theoretically they can. Will the metaverse manifest beneficially, as they say? First, on regulation, Gov cannot co-opt this if they want their benefit of access to accrue as well. And it was clear from David that access was their most important argument. Miko says governments can easily regulate big corporations. But again, the argument from opposition was whether they would want to regulate them even if they could. If you say that virtual spaces are so pervasive and people depend on this for their economic upliftment, why would the people in governments want to regulate these companies even if they can? Note that I agree that social media companies do offer some alternatives to bad government services in status quo. But the reason why we are able to regulate them now is because of competition, because people can opt out. But government makes it so that you cannot opt out, which was conceded by Luigi because of all the investments that were already pointed out. The last thing I want to rebut is this argument on access. I want you to think about how they prove this. They say the social media companies are profit-driven, but somehow they have the incentive to invest in poor areas, uplift people from economic poverty, invest in people who do not have phones. Does this sound realistic? Because I think it's likely that the metaverse will exist in spaces that are already easier to permeate, and not in the poor communities that they have no political capital and have no economic viability. At the end of this debate, we were the only team that proved what are the existing trends of Facebook and other social media companies and why the metaverse will not exist in the beneficial ways that they assert.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. May we now have the Opposition Reply. Here.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yes, you can be heard.
Great. Starting my speech, may I ask if there was the rest of the round live streamed as well? Before I answer the live stream thing. Yes, yeah, okay, sure, that's fine. Yeah, okay, go ahead then. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 points in my speech. First, where I just ask, are any of these things exclusive? And second, where I just bring back the principle. So first, are any of the things that government bench suggests to be exclusive? Let's talk about the benefits. They said that I would contend that on our side of the house, a lot of benefits that they name continue to exist. And this is material that was coming from Quintin, right? There are online marketplaces via Facebook Marketplace in order to get some level of economic access. There are digital spaces that make you less likely to experience harassment on our side of the house. Work exists on Slack, etc., etc. So I would contend a lot of the major benefits that they have, specifically on economy, specifically the anonymity and your ability to access things like work, are not exclusive to augmented reality. The exclusive benefits that they do name by using immersion is the level of interaction that you see when you have their face, when you experience their feelings, when you understand their facial expressions. Notice that we also get this for the fact on our side of the house is where you have real life. So I would contend in regards to any of the benefits that they suggest, it's unclear why any of them are exclusive. And even if you agree to some extent that there's more on their side of the house, it's unclear why that particular margin, for example, of more is important, especially when I talk about the principle later. So that's the benefits. I would suggest that the benefits are not necessarily exclusive. Let's talk about the harms. They suggest that exclusive harms like discrimination and lack of safety are exclusive on side opposition. But is it? Look at how they painted. If it's realistic, there are spaces that you can presumably walk on the street. If the emulating real life is so realistic to the point that it is very much likely that harassment is also felt on their side of the house. Notice, they agree to this level of humanity when they use this face and realism to reconcile the idea of political differences and associating the face to a person behind a screen. So if they want to claim this benefit, that they can somehow reconcile a lot of the political differences by using humanity, then presumably a lot of the harms that come with humanity as well, things like harassment, etc., also falls to their side of the house. This means that the benefits are not exclusive to their side of the house and the harms happen on their side as well. So I would contend a lot of the argumentation that comes from government is actually moot. So what is the difference then? And this is where we bring back the principle, right? we had said something very clear. If there is a structure and institution that you cannot opt out of, it is only right that we should hold its leaders accountable, regardless if the leaders are good or bad, regardless if Facebook is pernicious or not. Notice, they don't respond to these structural reasons from LO to suggest that we cannot opt out of these things, that we cannot hold social media higher-ups accountable, nor do they respond to the idea that from Quintin, that this level of technology cannot be held accountable, they state. They don't disprove this to be true. They agree, actually, that we cannot opt out, and agree that we can't hold them accountable in many instances, other than their whole idea about regulation, which again was responded by Quintin when we talk about that this level of technology isn't actually that, cannot realistically be held accountable. The way that they try to get away with this is by saying, you cannot opt out of Facebook now. It's same to status quo. Why? We give structural reasons as to why our side of the house is far easier to opt out of. First, addiction is less potent because it's not your whole life. Second, there are other alternatives of other social media, for the fact that the barrier of making a social media site as competition is far less than that of augmented reality. So I contend a competition is far more likely on our side. If you agree that it literally controls all aspects of your life, like social interaction, workplace, and entertainment, it becomes far harder to opt out on their side of the house. What does this imply? It means that choices are far more available on opposition, which makes us and allows us to opt out of these things. So I would contend, even if we on our side of the house cannot hold, for example, a lot of the social media higher-ups to the same extent that we would suggest, or they would suggest, I would contend that that's not important for the fact that it's on our side where we can opt out of these things. What does this mean? The principle of that if there's something that is pervasive, that is something that is controlling your life, your choices, for example, and even your capacity to enjoy happiness for the fact that addiction becomes a risk, then you should be able to hold these people accountable. This does not exist on government bench. Regulation does not happen for the fact that it's far more difficult. And notice it doesn't happen organically. Also, for the fact that if you believe a lot of our things about addiction that I also agree with, then there's less incentive to care about how the user experiences these things because they are going to use these things regardless. On our side of the house, the principle itself is already enough to win this debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Opposition Reply. To end this debate, may we now have Government Reply. Here.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, you can be heard.
All right, thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The contradictions pointed out at Opp Whip are not contradictions, but prove they have a very simplistic and dichotomous understanding of this debate. Number 1, they say it can't be immersive, but also protect you from harassment and potential brutality. I said at depth, Facebook is likely to sell immersion and the capacity to see people, to hear people as positive features of their new platform. But why the hell would Facebook say, look at our new feature, you can feel pain. Look at our new feature, you can feel brutality. Obviously, the platform has an active incentive to select which parts of immersion are likely to be positive. I just don't think they're stupid, which is likely that we still get our benefit because the nature of immersion is that you can pick and select what likely features of the platform are likely to be highlighted. I just don't understand why Facebook was likely to do otherwise. Secondly, don't let them wash this debate. There are many comparatives we introduce, explain why the marginal difference is better, that they say, so wash, and then ignore the responses that we give. Number 1, they cannot claim that real life interaction is good. You can make more meaningful connections, a lot of the things at the top of the LO speech, but then say, oh, you still have Slack, you still have Zoom, etc. Number 1, insofar as this is a benefit of more meaningful connections, the alternative of chats, of Zoom, of video calls are all worse. But secondly, it is just not likely you will not resort to physical spaces to offices unless there is a significant alternative that would have otherwise existed. So, the physical nature of work, the physical nature of social interaction, which they claim to be beneficial, is likely to still be incredibly pervasive. We think our access benefits, they try and wash because they do not have a meaningful response to this. Secondly, they say, well, poor communities are still poor. They don't explain why a company would likely invest in these areas. Number 1, they even explains that there are profit incentives to do this, i.e., if the same inclusivity that Quintin wants for people to opt in, i.e., the same market segmentation factors that have allowed Facebook to invest in internet where people had not had access to internet before in order for them to be able to be users of Facebook, which is already happening in status quo, then uniquely, this is far better than the alternatives of investment, of state failure, and governments that are often unlikely to listen to the demands of the communities that are most likely to be marginalized. All this proves we give significant comparisons that they simply do not respond to. I will explain some more in the second issue of this debate is not about Facebook good or bad, about Facebook unaccountable or accountable. It is about how Facebook is likely to change in its nature on both sides of the house. The first thing I want to note is that harm of you cannot opt out happens in the far future, i.e., what David explains to you is that this is a process. When there are still physical spaces, when people can opt for those things instead, Facebook has an active incentive to research on the effects of mental health, research on how you're likely to ensure more people are going to opt into your platform, and therefore, in the process of trying to reach this pervasive nature, they're likely to better their services. So, it is not that it happens tomorrow and then immediately people can't opt out and we can do nothing about it, but the process by which they're able to collect this large market share is likely to ensure you have to incentivize as many people to opt into this platform in comparison to physical spaces as a result. So at best, this is a future harm, which number one, does not explain where the instances where regulation does not work are also likely to occur on their side in the instances where state failure exists. But secondly, the nature by which it comes about as a large platform are likely to be good by its nature because they still compete with physical spaces. Lastly, secondly, actually, they explain that the cartelization, the monopolization of Facebook is bad, but it's just unclear why the alternative of Facebook is not going to exist on their side, and therefore it's still likely to occur, especially if Clinton wants all these other online platforms to still exist. But moreover, the harms of addiction, the harms of advertising are not mutually exclusive, especially the ones of political discourse, which we explain number one. In terms of addiction, it's much better because you don't have to rely on dopamine rushes to your brain. You don't have to rely on meaningless social interaction because you have a natural incentive to want to see your friends and the people around you, which we explain is better a version of Facebook than one that forces you through likes and shares. But moreover, a lot of the political discourse, one, allows you to create a safe space by blocking people out when you want, as Irene thinks is a harm, but moreover, is likely to moderate it when it does not happen. Lastly, I think Luigi admitted to being addicted to dating. I think it is hilarious. I hope Julia's watching. I'm very proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Reply. Thank you, debaters. You may now virtually cross the house. Thank you for the round. Everybody except the panel, please.